My name is Marin Caldwell, and I turned 30 with my brother's hand across my face. Go ahead and pour yourself a cup of coffee. Sit down with me for a moment, and let's talk. I want to ask you something before we even get into the dust of this story. How did you celebrate your last milestone birthday? Were you surrounded by cake, laughter, maybe a few people who genuinely wished you well? 10 seconds before the sky fell on my own 31st year, I was standing in my grandfather's quiet, sunlit study, holding the largest, most overwhelming gift anyone had ever handed me in my entire life. It was a check for exactly $100,000, written out in my grandfather's thick, steady handwriting. I had barely managed to read the incredible amount twice. Tracing the sharp ink numbers with my thumb, my heart beating so hard against my ribs I could hear it in my ears, when my brother Cole followed me into the room. He didn't just walk in. He stepped inside, slammed the heavy oak door shut behind him, and turned the brass lock with a sharp, definitive click. "Give it to me," he said. Honestly, I thought he was joking at first. You know that nervous chuckle you give when someone says something so completely out of bounds that your brain refuses to process it as reality? That was me. I smiled, thinking he was just being his usual boundary-pushing self. But then he stepped closer. His jaw was locked tight, his breathing was heavy and completely uneven, and his eyes stayed fixed, like a hawk tracking prey, on the white envelope in my hand. "This is mine," I told him, pulling it slightly back toward my chest. "Grandpa gave it to me." His palm struck my cheek before I could even think to move. The sound of it, that clean, echoing slap against skin, was somehow much sharper and louder than the actual physical pain. My ears instantly started ringing, a high-pitched buzz that blurred everything else out. Before I could even gasp, he grabbed my left wrist with a grip so tight it left white marks, leaned in close enough that I could smell his stale coffee, and hissed, "Hand it over right now, Marin, or I'm calling 911. That threat made absolutely no sense to me in that moment. Why would a thief call the police on his victim? But the pure, unadulterated terror vibrating in his voice told me something else did make sense. He wasn't asking for help, and he wasn't just throwing a temper tantrum. He was desperately trying to erase physical evidence. I twisted my wrist free with a strength I didn't know I had, stumbled backward, unlocked the door, while he lunged forward to reach for me again, and ran. I ran straight through the hallway of my grandfather's house, bursting past my gathered family without stopping to explain the bright red hand mark, rapidly swelling on the left side of my face. I didn't care what they thought. I just needed to get away. I got into my car and drove straight to the bank, my hands shaking so violently against the steering wheel that I could barely keep the vehicle straight. The entire time, I was gripping that white paper envelope so hard that the crisp paper bent and crumpled beneath my sweaty fingers. When I arrived, I bypassed the regular tellers and walked straight into the office of the branch manager, a man named Malcolm Price. I must have looked like a madwoman, breathing heavily, hair disheveled, a violent red welt painting my cheek. I laid the crumpled check on his desk and asked him to verify it. Malcolm took the check, smoothed out the wrinkles with his fingers, and typed the check number into his computer terminal. And then he suddenly stopped breathing. I watched his chest freeze. He stared at the glowing monitor screen, his eyes widening, then looked up at me, then back down at the screen. Without saying a single syllable, he quietly stood up, walked past me, closed his heavy office door, and locked it from the inside. He turned back around, his face completely drained of color. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a cautious, clinical whisper, "do not leave this building. Please call the police right now." Before I tell you what he found on that screen and what exactly happened after I walked out of those glass bank doors, let me pause and ask you, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching this story from? And what is the weather like outside your window? Does the sky out there match your mood today? I'm genuinely curious to see how far this story will travel and how many people need to hear this lesson today. The branch manager, Malcolm Price, did not offer me his hand after locking the office door. He kept both of his palms pressed completely flat against the dark wood of his desk, as though he was deeply afraid that any sudden movement might send me running out into the street. "Is this the original check?" he asked, his voice low, steady, and incredibly tense. "Yes," I stammered, my hand flying up to touch the stinging heat on my cheek. "My grandfather wrote it less than an hour ago in his private study." "Did anyone photograph it?" Malcolm asked, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist into knots. I don't know," I whispered, my mind racing backward to the chaos of the birthday gathering. "Why? What is wrong with it?" Instead of answering immediately, Malcolm slowly turned his computer monitor slightly toward me. He didn't turn it enough for me to read every single line of data, but it was enough for me to see my own name printed in stark digital text on an account that I had absolutely no memory of ever opening. The exact check number in his system matched the physical check resting between us on his desk. According to the bank's real-time ledger, that identical check had already been processed and deposited through a mobile banking application exactly 42 minutes before I walked through the front doors of the branch. The receiving account on the screen wasn't my personal savings. It was registered under a business named Marin Caldwell Property Services. I sat there, completely frozen. I had never owned a company by that name. I had never even stepped foot in this specific banking institution before today. Malcolm pointed a manicured finger at a bright yellow warning banner flashing at the top of his computer screen. "The mobile deposit is currently on a hard security hold," he explained carefully, because the submitted image failed several of our automated fraud checks. "Whoever uploaded this transaction used a digital photograph of your actual driver's license, your correct social security number, and a physical billing address associated with your credit file. But the device location data and the originating phone number do not match your customer profile at all." As he spoke, the sharp, throbbing ache in my left cheek flared up again. And suddenly, in a wave of sickening clarity, my brother's irrational, violent behavior in the study made perfect, terrifying sense. Cole hadn't cornered me and slapped me because he was simply jealous of Grandpa's generosity. He didn't just want the money. He desperately needed the physical check in his hands because it was the only thing that could prove his mobile upload was a fraudulent duplicate. If I kept the paper, I kept the proof. My mind flashed back to 6 months ago, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. We were helping our mother pack up her kitchen to move into her new house. Cole had walked up to me with a thick, messy manila folder, complaining about how disorganized Grandpa's paperwork was getting. He pointed to a signature line and said, "Hey, Marin, I need you to sign this real quick. Grandpa is updating his emergency medical contacts at the clinic, and the doctors need a signature confirming you're willing to speak with them if something happens to him." I was exhausted, carrying heavy boxes and completely distracted. I trusted my brother. I signed the pages blindly, without reading a single sentence of the attached packet. I remembered the casual text he sent me that evening. "Thanks, sis. You're a lifesaver." Sitting in that sterile bank office, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together so violently it made me dizzy. He hadn't been looking out for Grandpa. He had been harvesting my signature, waiting for the perfect moment to build a digital ghost version of me. I looked at Malcolm, my voice finally finding its footing. He planned this. He knew exactly what was coming. I pulled my phone out of my bag right there in Malcolm's office, my fingers still trembling as I dialed the local police department. While we waited for the officers to arrive, Malcolm moved with a quiet, calculated efficiency that both grounded me and made the gravity of the situation sink in deeper. He took a pair of small metal tongs from a drawer, carefully lifted the original check from his desk, and slipped it into a thick, clear plastic evidence sleeve. He looked at me over his glasses and gently asked me not to touch the plastic again. Then, he picked up his desk phone, dialed a direct extension, and requested that the bank's internal fraud department immediately preserve every single piece of data linked to the transaction. The digital mobile deposit image, the unique device identification numbers, the original digital account application, and the high-definition security footage from the bank lobby from that morning. I watched him handle the digital crime scene, my thoughts scattering like dry leaves in a storm. But the real shift in the air happened when the heavy glass doors of the bank opened, and my grandfather walked in before the police officers even had a chance to arrive. His name is Arthur Caldwell, and at 78 years old, he still carries himself with the rigid, unyielding posture of the commercial contractor he had been for most of his adult life. His shoulders were completely square, his deep voice was usually steady as a rock, and his large hands were heavily scarred and calloused from decades of hard physical labor. He was a man who had survived collapsed scaffolding, bad economies, and family tragedies without ever losing his footing. But the exact moment he walked into that small office and saw the angry, dark red mark rapidly swelling on the side of my face, that legendary steadiness completely cracked. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened, and his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "Who did that to you, Marin?" he demanded, and for the first time in my life, I heard his voice shake. I couldn't bring myself to answer him immediately. There is something so incredibly heavy about speaking a betrayal out loud. I knew that the moment I formed the syllables and let them leave my mouth, the entire horrifying nightmare would become an unchangeable reality that our family could never take back. "Cole," I finally whispered, the name feeling like ash on my tongue. Grandpa slowly closed his eyes, taking a long, ragged breath through his nose. When he opened them again, he didn't look surprised enough. He looked deeply weary, crushed under a weight he had been trying to ignore for months. And honestly, that lack of surprise frightened me far more than the flashing warning banners on the bank manager's computer screen. It meant that the foundations of our family had been rotting long before today, and I was just now noticing the smell. Before I could ask him what he meant, two uniformed officers entered the room, accompanied by a sharp, observant woman named Lena Ortiz, a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Ortiz took control of the small room instantly. Recognizing the volatile family dynamic, she politely but firmly asked my grandfather and me to step into separate areas to tell our stories independently. I sat with an officer and explained everything from the very beginning. The quiet 31st birthday gift in the study, the heavy sound of the door locking, the terrifying rage in Cole's eyes, the violent slap, his bizarre demands, and his desperate threat to call the police on me. In the next room, Grandpa confirmed the basic facts to Detective Ortiz. He had written the check entirely by his own hand. The money was a legitimate gift meant solely for my future, and his signature on the paper was completely genuine. Then, Detective Ortiz walked back into Malcolm's office. pulled out a notepad, and asked a single question that completely changed the shape and scope of everything we thought we knew. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, looking directly into my grandfather's tired eyes, "has anyone in your household recently had unsupervised access to your physical checkbooks, your online banking applications, your personal tax records, or your legal identification documents?" Grandpa looked down at the dark wood of the desk, unable to meet her gaze. "My grandson helps me pay my monthly utilities and bills," he murmured softly. "Cole?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Grandpa nodded his head just once. Right then, Malcolm returned to the office carrying a high-resolution printed copy of the fraudulent mobile deposit submission. The image uploaded from the cell phone was slightly blurry around the edges, but as I leaned in to look closer, my stomach did a violent flip. This wasn't a separate, cleverly forged check drawn from a stolen book. It was an exact high-definition photograph of the very check currently sitting inside the evidence sleeve on the desk. It had been taken before Grandpa had ever handed the white envelope to me in the study. The distinct, jagged folds on the corner of the envelope matched perfectly. And there, right beside the carefully written $100,000 amount, was a tiny, faint ink smudge from Grandpa's old fountain pen. Someone had quietly intercepted the mail, opened the envelope, photographed the check, carefully resealed it, and then waited with a straight face for me to receive it at my birthday breakfast. Cole hadn't just reacted in a moment of sudden impulse or jealousy. He had been sitting across from me at the kitchen table, watching me blow out my candles, knowing exactly what was inside that envelope before I even touched it. He had timed the deposit down to the exact minute. "I want to pause here and ask you, looking at me over this cup of coffee, have you ever sat across from a sibling, a relative, or a close friend completely oblivious to the fact that they were actively plotting your ruin while smiling at you? If this is hitting a nerve, take a breath, stay with me, and let's keep going." Detective Ortiz pulled up a chair, her eyes scanning the printouts before she looked up at Detective Lena Ortiz, asked whether Cole had been left entirely alone near the gifts that morning. Grandpa rubbed his face with his heavy, calloused hands, his voice dropping an octave as he admitted that he had asked Cole to carry several envelopes from the kitchen counter into the quiet study to set up the birthday table. A wave of physical sickness washed through me. He had known the exact dollar amount I was getting before the envelope ever touched my fingers. He had calculated his move down to the minute. Then Malcolm pointed to the digital account application on his monitor, guiding our eyes to the recovery details. My stolen identity and personal records had been used to construct the framework of the business account, but the secondary recovery phone number ended in 4 specific digits that sent a chill straight down my spine. It was a number I knew by heart. Cole had been using that exact line for a cheap, prepaid phone for the last 2 months, claiming to everyone that his regular cell phone was broken and sent out for repairs. Grandpa's expression hardened into an icy mask I had never seen before. "How much was he trying to steal from us, Marin?" he asked, his voice dead and hollow. "Was it just this check today?" Malcolm adjusted his glasses and looked at us with a profound, professional gravity. "Today? He was trying to move exactly $100,000. The weight of that single word, today, settled between the three of us like a lead anchor. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Detective Ortiz noticed it instantly, her investigator instincts locking onto the phrasing. She tapped her pen against her notepad. "We need to find out exactly what happened before today. If he has this level of access, this isn't his first time testing the locks." Grandpa reached slowly into his heavy canvas jacket and pulled out his ring of house keys. For the very first time in my entire life, I watched his powerful, weathered hand tremble as the metal keys jingled in the quiet room. "There are physical financial statements stored in the filing cabinets in my private office," he whispered, looking at the floor. "Some of them have gone missing over the last few months. I thought I had just misplaced them in my old age." As he spoke, my mind began spinning backward through the last 3 years of family dinners and late-night phone calls. I remembered every single time Cole had called me dramatic, crazy, or paranoid for dare questioning his sudden money problems or asking where his income was coming from. I remembered every single instance my mother had pulled me into the kitchen to tell me he was just under an immense amount of professional pressure and needed space. I remembered every utility bill and late rent payment I had quietly covered for him because our family mantra had always been that blood comes first, and family is supposed to help family. Sitting in that room, watching the red welt on my face catch the fluorescent lights in Malcolm's office mirror, a terrifying thought took root in my chest. Was blood really a sacred bond? Or had I simply been using that beautiful word to excuse a heavy, suffocating iron chain he had wrapped around my neck? Suddenly, my phone began vibrating violently across the polished wood of Malcolm's desk. The screen illuminated with Cole's name and contact picture. He was calling me. Detective Ortiz lunged forward slightly, her eyes locking onto the flashing screen as she raised a hand to stop me. "Do not answer that yet," she commanded sharply. "Let it ring out." The call vibrated until it finally cut to voicemail. For a second, the room was completely silent. Then, a sharp text message notification pinged. I picked up the device and read the text out loud so the detective could hear it. "Bring me the physical check right now, or Grandpa goes down with you." Before I could even draw a breath into my lungs to process the threat, a second text message flashed onto the screen right beneath the first. "You have absolutely no idea what you signed 6 months ago." Detective Ortiz didn't hesitate. She took out her own department camera, photographed the glowing messages directly off my phone screen, and turned to me with an intensely serious expression. "Marin, I need you to think very carefully. Have you ever signed any financial documents, property agreements, or legal paperwork for your grandfather?" The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked at her, the sudden weight of my own past compliance crushing down on my chest, and I told her the absolute, unvarnished truth. "6 months ago," I whispered, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. "Cole brought me a thick folder while I was helping our mother pack up her kitchen to move across town. He told me Grandpa needed to update his emergency contact paperwork at the hospital and the local clinic. He said, my signature simply confirmed that I was willing to speak to doctors and make medical decisions if an emergency happened while he was away. I was exhausted, carrying heavy boxes, and completely distracted, so I signed 2 pages near the back without reading the entire packet. A wave of intense shame washed over me before the anger even had a chance to surface. I had spent my entire adult life believing my brother Cole was just careless, impulsive, and deeply selfish. I had spent years giving him loans and covering his mistakes because I thought he was just a disorganized mess. I had never, not even for a single second, considered the terrifying possibility that he might actually be methodical. Grandpa Arthur stared at me, his weathered face tightening as a memory clicked into place for him, too. "He brought me the exact same folder," Grandpa said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "He told me the same story about emergency medical updates, except the page he asked me to sign was a temporary authorization naming him as my financial assistant while I underwent my knee surgery." Detective Ortiz stood up and tapped her notepad against her palm. Do not assume what those documents actually are until I can get my hands on the physical copies, she warned us, her professional tone doing very little to hide the underlying danger. But if your brother has combined both of your genuine signatures with stolen identification numbers, he may have created a legal financial authority that neither of you ever intended to give him. The uniform officers took high-resolution digital photographs of the growing yellowish swelling on my cheek to document the physical assault. I sat down and gave a formal written statement to the department and gave them explicit permission to clone and copy every single text message thread on my phone. While I did that, Malcolm Price worked on the bank terminal, placing an absolute ironclad freeze on the fraudulent business account. Before the mobile deposit could clear through the clearinghouse system, and he slapped a high-priority security alert across Grandpa's entire financial profile. Malcolm explained that my original birthday check could not be legally deposited or cashed until a formal criminal investigation separated the physical paper from the duplicate mobile image Cole had uploaded. But honestly, for the very first time on my birthday, I didn't care about the $100,000 at all. All I cared about was figuring out exactly how much of our lives Cole had already quietly touched and ruined without us knowing. I couldn't go home that night. The thought of sitting in my apartment, wondering if Cole had a key or if he was waiting in the shadows, made my throat close up. I stayed on the couch of my closest friend, Taryn Vale, a sharp corporate attorney who handled high-stakes business disputes for a living. Taryn didn't pretend to be a seasoned criminal defense lawyer, but she knew exactly how financial predators operated, and she immediately sat me down at her kitchen table to make a survival checklist. Freeze my credit reports across all 3 bureaus, change every single digital password I owned, request a completely new driver's license number from the DMV, pull my full credit history, preserve our text messages in an encrypted drive, and completely stop discussing the details of the case with anyone in the family who might accidentally repeat information back to Cole. While we were sitting there, my phone began lighting up over and over again. My mother called me 17 times in a row. When I finally answered the line on speakerphone, she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Her name is Denise, and she had spent the better part of my childhood and adult life translating Cole's toxic behavior into softer, acceptable family words. If Cole stole money from my purse, she told me he had just borrowed it because he was short on gas. If he lied straight to our faces, she claimed he had just panicked under pressure. If he ruthlessly manipulated us to get his way, she sighed and told me he just deeply needed his sister to support him. "Marin, please." My mother wept through the phone speaker. "Cole called me. He says you attacked him in the study. He says Grandpa gave both of you the birthday money split equally, and you tried to violently tear the check out of his hands to take all of it for yourself." "Mom," I said, my voice completely dead and steady. He locked me in a room and he slapped me across the face. There was a long, horrifying pause on the other end of the line. "Well," my mother stammered, her voice dropping into that familiar, enabling whisper. "He says you pushed him first." I stared across the kitchen table at Taryn, who was listening to every single word with a look of pure professional disgust on her face. I leaned closer to the phone. "Did he tell you that he opened a fraudulent bank account in my name using my social security number, Mom? Did he tell you that he snuck into Grandpa's study, opened my birthday envelope, photographed the check before I ever saw it, and tried to steal the entire thing via an app?" My mother's ragged breathing suddenly hitched. He told me there was just a minor misunderstanding about the paperwork. "A legal misunderstanding does not require my stolen social security number, Mom," I said. She immediately began pleading with me, her voice rising in panic, begging me not to make this situation any bigger than it already was. And in that exact second, a cold realization washed over me. That specific phrase, "don't make it bigger," had been the armor that protected Cole his entire life. It was the phrase that had kept his unpaid personal loans private, his dirty gambling rumors quiet, and his violent, angry outbursts safely locked inside the walls of our family home. I realized right then that our collective silence had never actually prevented damage from happening. Our silence had simply made the damage much easier for Cole to inflict. "I am not making this bigger, Mom," I told her, my hand completely steady as I prepared to hang up the phone. "I am simply refusing to make it smaller anymore." I ended the call, leaving my mother's frantic voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. The next morning, the sun hadn't even fully cleared the horizon when Detective Ortiz called my cell phone, asking me to meet her immediately at Grandpa's house. Officers were already stationed on the property, preparing to supervise a comprehensive search of his private home office. When I arrived, the most disturbing part of the entire scene was that absolutely nothing was broken. There were no smashed windows, no forced door frames, no overturned drawers. Whoever had been siphoning our family's life savings knew exactly precisely what keys to use, and had clearly been invited into that sacred space many times over the years. We found 3 full years of bank statements neatly organized inside a locked metal filing cabinet, but as Taryn and Detective Ortiz cross-referenced the physical ledger, we realized that exactly 6 monthly statements were entirely missing. When Detective Ortiz booted up Grandpa's laptop, the digital forensic footprint revealed repeated logins originating from an entirely unfamiliar device location. Worse, his personal email account had a hidden forwarding rule silently running in the background. It was programmed to instantly send any incoming messages containing specific words like bank, transfer, statement, and verification to an anonymous, encrypted email address that none of us recognized. Taryn helped us systematically print out every single digital footprint before we disabled the rule for good. Then, Grandpa Arthur reached into the back of a dusty desk drawer and pulled out a faded carbon copy from an old, forgotten checkbook. His eyes scanned the small handwritten paper and his face turned to stone. It showed a series of recurring monthly payments of exactly $3,850 made out to a company listed as Northline Property Consulting. Grandpa stared at the paper, his hands shaking. "I have never hired or heard of a company called Northline in my entire life," he whispered. Taryn pulled up the state's official business registration portal on her tablet, and within seconds, the truth stared right back at us. The corporate organizer and sole legal owner listed for Northline Property Consulting was none other than Cole Caldwell. Over the previous 18 months alone, Cole's dummy corporation had drained nearly $70,000 directly out of Grandpa's primary retirement account. The digital transaction notes fraudulently labeled the massive drains as routine maintenance fees for rental properties. But Grandpa had sold his very last rental property over 4 long years ago. "I trusted him," Grandpa said, sitting down heavily into his worn leather desk chair. His deep voice held absolutely no rage or anger in that moment. It held only a profound, crushing humiliation. And right then, watching my powerful grandfather shrink into his chair, my deep-seated fear finally hardened into an absolute, unyielding resolve. Cole had explicitly counted on our collective love becoming an embarrassment. He truly believed that Grandpa would rather lose his hard-earned savings than publicly admit his own flesh and blood had deceived him. He believed that I would rather quietly surrender the $100,000 check than expose the fact that I had been foolish enough to sign emergency documents without reading them. He completely took for granted that our mother would smooth everything over and bury the truth before the police could ask difficult public questions. He had meticulously studied every single emotional weakness in our family, and he had turned each one of our virtues into a heavy lock to keep us silent. Detective Ortiz turned to me, her eyes sharp. "Are you willing to make a controlled phone call, Marin? Your brother still believes you have the physical check in your possession. If we let him talk on a monitored line, he might explain exactly what he wants you to do with it, and we can catch him on tape." "Let's do it," I said without a single second of hesitation. With the detective's specialized recording equipment hooked directly to my phone, I dialed his number from Grandpa's kitchen table. Cole answered on the very first ring. Finally, his voice snapped through the speaker, arrogant and completely impatient. "Do you have the check with you?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice as flat and even as possible. "Then stop being completely stupid, Marin, and bring it straight to me right now," he commanded. "What exactly did I sign 6 months ago, Cole?" I asked, leaning into the microphone. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "You signed exactly what you needed to sign for the family," he muttered defensively. "That is not a legal answer, Cole," I pressed. His voice dropped into a low, threatening hiss. "You signed documents stating that Grandpa authorized both of us to manage certain operational funds for his estate. If you choose to go to the police with that check, those papers are going to make you look like you were a primary part of the entire operation. So just shut up and listen to me." My hand tightened around the phone so hard, my knuckles turned white, but Detective Ortiz raised a single finger in the air, silently reminding me to stay perfectly calm and let him speak. "A part of what, Cole?" I asked softly. "Don't play completely innocent with me, Marin," he scoffed. "Just bring me the original paper check. Once I have it physically in my hands, I can fix the mobile deposit error, close out the business account, and make all of the paperwork completely disappear." There it was. It wasn't a full, detailed confession, but it was more than enough to legally prove criminal knowledge that no innocent person could ever possibly have. "Why did you choose to use my name for the fraudulent company, Cole?" I asked, the final question burning in my throat. "Because your credit was completely clean." His voice shot back, colder than the physical slap he had delivered to my face the day before. And then he added the words that he had used to keep me small for decades. "And because absolutely nobody in this family ever believes you over me anyway." The line went completely dead as he hung up. For most of my life, a sentence like that would have completely broken my spirit. But instead, I looked across the table at Grandpa, at the detective, and at the mountain of fraudulent records covering the kitchen table. "This time," I said, looking directly into the recording device, "he doesn't get to decide who believes me anymore." The recorded call gave Detective Ortiz immediate probable cause to expand the investigation, but she warned me that Cole would become significantly more dangerous once he realized the bank had blocked the money entirely. She was right. By noon that day, he had already sent mass text messages to our extended relatives, claiming that I had maliciously manipulated Grandpa into giving me his life savings. By evening, he had posted a vague, threatening statement online about hidden elder abuse festering inside our own family. He never used my name directly, but everyone in our small circle knew exactly who he meant. My phone instantly filled with questions from confused relatives. An aunt asked whether Grandpa was even mentally competent anymore. And a cousin told me I should just split the $100,000 gift to keep the peace. One old family friend even said that even if Cole had made a mistake, involving the police was cruel, Not a single one of them asked why my face was bruised. I stopped defending myself one person at a time, and Taryn helped me write a single, unyielding response to the group. Grandpa was safe. The bank had identified suspected fraud, and the matter was being handled by law enforcement. Then I turned off my notifications. The next terrifying discovery came directly from my pulled credit report. 3 separate credit cards had been opened in my name over the previous year, totaling a balance of $26,000. The listed mailing address belonged to a private mailbox Cole rented through his dummy company, Northline Property Consulting. One card had paid for online sports betting, another for expensive hotel rooms, and the third for a luxury watch he had proudly worn to my birthday breakfast. I remembered complimenting that exact watch. He had smiled at me and said hard work finally paid off. Grandpa's forensic accountant uncovered that the monthly transfers were only part of the scheme. Cole had used the false authorization documents to request a major line of credit secured against Grandpa's actual house. The application was scheduled for final approval the following week. If the birthday check had cleared into the fake account, Cole planned to use it as proof of liquidity and move the loan money before the bank completed its review, creating a total exposure of more than $200,000. Grandpa listened to the report without interrupting, then immediately asked Taryn to arrange an emergency meeting with an SAP before a state attorney to strip Cole of every authorization carrying his name and place a formal fraud alert on his property title. He also changed the physical locks on his house. My mother arrived while the locksmith was working, staring at the new deadbolt as if it were a public announcement of our family's collapse. "You are locking your own grandson out?" she wept. Grandpa looked at her for a long time. He locked Marin in a room and hid her. He used her identity, and he used mine. The question is not why I'm locking him out, Denise. The question is why we kept giving him keys for so long. Mom flinched, sitting on the porch and covering her face as she finally admitted Cole had been draining her. 2. Taking $30,000 from her retirement account by claiming he owed dangerous people and that refusing him could get the family hurt. I loved my mother, but I could no longer protect her from the consequences of protecting him. That night, Cole called Grandpa from a new number, unaware the line was preserved by investigators. "You let Marin turn you against me." Cole sharpened his voice through the speaker. "She signed the papers too. If I go down, she goes down." Grandpa never looked away from the phone. "Then, bring copies of every document tomorrow to Taryn's office. We settle everything privately." Detective Ortiz had suggested the offer. The original check remained secured at the bank, but we placed a harmless photocopy inside an envelope on Taryn's conference table. The room was legally monitored by investigators. The next afternoon, Cole entered wearing his suit and the watch purchased with my stolen credit card. He smiled when he saw the envelope. "There she is," he said, "the reasonable sister." He placed his folder on the table, but Taryn immediately pointed out that the pages used completely different fonts, inconsistent margins, and fraudulent notary seals from a county neither of us had ever visited. Cole ignored her, tapping my envelope. "Give me that, and I'll destroy these." "And what happens to the cards in my name, Cole? And Northline? And the loan against Grandpa's house?" I asked. His smile disappeared as he looked toward the door. "You set me up." "No," I said, leaning forward. "I finally read what you put in front of me." Cole stood so quickly, his chair struck the wall, grabbing the folder and reaching for the envelope, but Grandpa placed his heavy hand firmly over it. "You stole from me," Grandpa said flatly. "I was going to pay it back." Cole's face twisted with rage. "With the check you should have given me in the first place." The room went completely silent as the gravity of his admission landed. Realizing what he had just spoken into the microphone, Cole shoved Grandpa's hand away, snatched the envelope, and tore it open. When he saw the useless photocopy, panic replaced his rage. He rushed for the rear exit, bolting into the alley before the officers could secure the hallway. He left his forged documents behind. Cole was not arrested at the office that afternoon. Detective Ortiz technically had more than enough probable cause to bring him in for questioning, but the Financial Crimes Unit wanted every single line of the fraudulent banking records tied directly and unchangeably to his digital footprint before they officially made their move. Plus, he had not physically attacked anyone during the actual meeting in the conference room. By the time uniformed patrol officers finally reached his apartment building, he was completely gone. For the next 48 hours, my brother became a terrifying, silent shadow, lingering around the very edges of our daily lives. He sent my mother frantic, weeping voice messages claiming that I had single-handedly ruined his future. He emailed Grandpa Arthur from an encrypted, untraceable address, promising to return every single dollar he had taken if we would just withdraw our official police statements. He called our extended relatives late at night, telling them that I had entirely fabricated the fraud because I was greedy and wanted to secure the entire family inheritance for myself. With every new version of the story he spun, he made himself look more innocent and me look infinitely more monstrous. Then, the situation turned dangerous. Someone broke into Grandpa's house shortly after midnight. The brand new, heavy deadbolt lock we had just installed had been violently forced open with a crowbar. The outdoor security camera caught a tall figure entering through the side door with a dark hood pulled tightly over his face. He went directly into the private office, ripped open the desk drawers, removed Grandpa's laptop, and carried away 2 heavy cardboard document boxes containing years of financial files. He knew Grandpa was safely staying at my apartment, but he had absolutely no idea that Detective Ortiz had asked us to install a secondary, hidden camera inside the office bookshelf. That camera recorded his face with crystal clarity when his hood accidentally slipped in the dark. He also didn't know that the laptop he stole had been intentionally replaced with a broken, outdated device containing absolutely no useful files. At exactly 2:13 a.m., that same night, my own car alarm began blaring out on the street outside Taryn's apartment building. We watched from an upstairs window as a dark figure frantically opened the rear door of my vehicle and leaned far inside. The police arrived before we even went downstairs, but the person managed to flee through a dark alleyway. In the back seat of my car, officers discovered a canvas bag containing blank checks from Grandpa's missing checkbook, exact copies of the forged authorization documents, and one of the active credit cards Cole had opened in my name. Cole was trying to desperately plant evidence to build the exact lie he had been telling our relatives, that I had stolen Grandpa's financial information and created Northline Property Consulting myself. For a few seconds, looking at that bag on my seat, I could not even speak. If the police had found that canvas bag without our security cameras, without the bank records, and without the recorded controlled call, his trap might have looked completely convincing. He hadn't simply planned to steal my birthday money. He had planned to leave me carrying the legal weight of his federal crimes. "That is my brother," I told Detective Ortiz, my voice trembling but certain as I verified the night vision footage. The sentence hurt deeply, but it no longer weakened me. Investigators quickly obtained warrants for Cole's apartment, his storage unit, his digital accounts, and his business records. They found online betting statements, counterfeit notary stamps, copies of my identification, and a physical spreadsheet detailing exactly how much money he believed each relative could be pressured to contribute. Next to my name, he had written, "Clean credit, guilt responsive, likely to comply if mom calls." I read that line twice, my chest tightening. Every birthday call, every sudden request for emergency money over the years suddenly looked completely different. He had reduced my sisterly love for him to a vulnerability statistic in a spreadsheet. When Mom asked to see the evidence, Grandpa shared the spreadsheet page and the bank transfers. She sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour without speaking a word, then opened her phone and played the last message Cole had sent her. "Tell Marin to drop it. If she doesn't, I'll make sure the family knows she stole from Grandpa. You know people will believe you. Say you saw her taking his checkbook." Mom stopped the recording, her eyes filling with tears. "He wants me to lie for him." "He expected you to, Mom," I said softly. That distinction finally broke through her years of enabling. Helping Cole had always felt to her like unconditional love, but now he was asking her to actively destroy her own daughter. The next day, our extended family proceeded with a scheduled Sunday birthday lunch for Grandpa. Cole actually showed up, unwashed and desperate, believing public family pressure would force us to back down. But before he could speak, Grandpa stood up and told the entire room the plain, unvarnished truth about the bank fraud, the stolen identities, and the ongoing police investigation. When Cole tried to perform his usual lie, shouting that I gave him permission, I simply took out my phone and played his recorded voice from the controlled call through a Bluetooth speaker. "Because yours was clean. Nobody ever believes you over me." The room went entirely silent. Cole lunged for my phone, shoving Grandpa sideways into a chair, but 2 officers waiting in the adjacent room entered instantly and wrestled him into handcuffs. As they led him away, he screamed that I had destroyed this family. "No," I said, looking at my mother holding Grandpa's hand. "I stopped you from destroying what was left." Months later, faced with a mountain of unassailable digital and physical evidence, Cole accepted a plea agreement covering bank fraud, identity theft, elder financial exploitation, document forgery, burglary, and assault-related conduct. The judge ordered full financial restitution and a sentence of several years in state custody. At his sentencing, he tried to apologize but immediately added that none of this would have happened if Grandpa had divided the money fairly in the first place. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. His apology was still just a negotiation. When I addressed the court, I looked past him and said, "I spent years saving him from consequences. I believe that was love." It was not. It was permission. The bank eventually cleared the original gift and reissued it as a cashier's check. I used a portion of the $100,000 as a down payment on a small brick building where I opened my own restoration studio, a dream I had postponed for years because Cole always had a newer, bigger emergency. My relationship with my mother didn't heal in a single conversation, but she attended counseling, learned to recognize emotional manipulation, and stopped defending his choices. On my 31st birthday, Grandpa handed me a plain card. Inside, he had written, "The best thing you built this year was a life nobody else controls." Families do not survive because one person quietly absorbs every single injury. They survive when love includes honesty, clear boundaries, and real consequences. Sometimes, protecting a family means entirely refusing to protect the person who is actively harming it. So, tell me honestly in the comments below. If your own brother did this to you, would you have taken the case as far as I did? Would you ever open that door again?